Welcome back to Service to School Stories. I'm your host, Sydney Mathis, Director of Student Success here at Service to School. As a former college admissions officer and the spouse of an active duty service member, I'm excited to dig into topics within the higher education landscape as it relates to veterans and transitioning service members. Let's dig in.
Really excited for our guest on the podcast today. Gus, thank you so much for joining us here at Service to School Stories. Mostly excited to hear about your journey through the military, but then afterwards in starting Service to School. So Gus is one of our co-founders. He's also our current chairman of the board. He's a graduate of West Point. After his time in service, he went on to earn an MBA from NYU Stern School of Business and is currently working as a business management consultant. So Gus, I know you have a busy schedule, but thank you so much for lending your time here so we can just hear a little bit about, what was going on to make you start Service to School. And just, I want to hear a little bit more about, the growth and where you see Service to School going. So
thanks. Definitely. Yeah, so much fun to talk to you. Thanks, Sydney. And you might not hear, but Amanda's in the background recording. So thank you both very much for having me on this. So do you want the long version or the shorter version for the origin?
I'm always here for the longer version.
Awesome. So, I was thinking about this, and it really, we have a kind of a handful of core founders, me, Anna Ivy, KT, Khalil Tawil, Tim Shaw, and Chad Burgess. And so, I think really it starts maybe with Tim and I back at West Point. And so, when I grew up in North Carolina. My dad was in 7th Special Forces Group. And so I'd grown up mostly in a very military environment near Fort Bragg. And everybody, this was, 7th group in the 80s. So they were all just, steely-eyed, unconventional killers, right? They're all going to South America all the time. They were always deployed. And when they got back, that's kind of who his friends were. And that's who I got to hang out with as a kid. So, I got a rifle when I was 10 and was shooting from then. I was doing land nav when I was 10, 11. And I got to go to like the SF range, and shoot Uzis and stuff and got to see, recoilless rifles. And so I was
sounds like a little boy's dream.
It was amazing. It was great. And so I loved the military from kind of young age. I was just around it. And that was just kind of part of my DNA. And so went to West Point, and I really had a culture shock when I went to West Point, because West Point was not what I grew up around. West Point was, sharply made beds, really shiny shoes, ironed uniforms. And I thought I was going to go to West Point and just become this elite, Ranger infantry kind of guy. And it was like drill and rifle, and like, dress right dress and stuff like that. And so I was pretty jaded about that. Like I was kind of shocked. Like I was like, well, but what I grew up with were all these like smoking, hard drinking bikers that got to go to South America and like do drug interdiction and foreign area, foreign internal defense type missions. And here I am like marching in a parade. Like I do not get any of this. So that was like plebe year, and sophomore year, I was kind of jaded. Sophomore year got a little better because we got to do Buckner. We got to do some stuff that was at least closer to the Army. But I was kind of a poor cadet. I mean, I did well in school. I did well in the physical stuff. I liked the Army stuff, but I thought the drill was just stupid. So I didn't really like make my bed. I didn't really like shine my shoes. And so I was kind of, like not really excelling at the whole West Point thing. And then actually I met Tim, and Tim was someone who really kind of changed my perspective on this. And so I remember it was junior year, I think, because I'd had a ton of hours by that time. I'd gotten in trouble a lot. And then junior year, I was still kind of like, what is this? I was like, should I just like enlist? Should I just get out and enlist? Because that's the kind of stuff I like to do rather than this West Point stuff. So I was like a squad leader, and Tim was my platoon sergeant. I hadn't met him yet. I kind of knew him at Buckner, but I didn't really meet him. We weren't really friends yet. And we had this thing, I was in 1st Regiment. And so we were called the Empire or something like that. And so one of the fun things we would do is the cadets march back from Buckner, the plebes, the first year cadets. When they become they start their academic year, they do like a 12-mile march from Buckner, and they march into the kind of courtyard for our regiment. And all the upperclassmen, it's like there's a balcony, there's like stairs, then a balcony, then windows, and all the cadets, upper class cadets kind of line up on the balcony and line up and everyone looks like, you're 17, a 20-year-old looks like, a very, intimidating figure to you.
Right.
And so as they march in, they play the Empire music. I'm not sure what the do 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 do,
like from Star Wars, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the new cadets march in. They've just done a 12-mile march. They're filthy. All these cadets are very intimidating. You play the music. They have to go. There's a basement they have to run through. There's like a gauntlet, and everyone's screaming at and stuff. But so that was the scenario, what was going to happen. And Tim had actually gone through, and I don't know how he did this, but he got a clean uniform for everybody. And he had put that uniform on everybody's bed. And it was just so incredibly, like, like when you've been in the field forever, it's so awful. You feel so grimy. You've been there for a week.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
As a military spouse, I wash all of that in the washing machine. And it's just getting my washing machine clean afterwards is nearly impossible.
So disgusting. And so he had somehow gotten everybody a fresh uniform. And I think he cleaned them all himself. But as soon as everybody got into their room, they had a new fresh uniform laid out for them. And so that did a couple things. One is it was just so thoughtful, and our platoon looked great. Like our platoon was immaculate looking, right? And I was like, oh, we look better than any other platoon out there. So it had kind of the purpose of like, we look the best. And two, those cadets were ready to go to war with Tim, right? And so that was kind of the first time I saw, oh, okay, you can do this barracks BS, you can do this shiny shoes thing and still be a good fighter, a good infantryman, a good warrior. And that was kind of the first time it clicked for me, like, oh, I could do both of these things. And so after that, I was like, oh, okay, let me figure out how to play this game. And so that's when I started doing much better at West Point. So that was kind of the first time I met Tim. And after that, and we're peers, but I was like, wow, that guy gets it. So I was really moved, inspired by that. And so, from then, we've been friends basically since then. So we were friends at West Point. We went to OBC together. We went to all the infantry post-OBC schools together. We were on the same plane, deployed together. We went to different battalions, but our first deployment was together. So we've been friends since then. And then we also, during all of our various activities, we'd also done a lot of volunteering. So one thread is this kind of military thread. The other thread is service. And so we had, like when we were at Fort Lewis, we both volunteered at a juvenile center outside of Fort Lewis to tutor folks in juvenile detention. We both volunteered at like the library in Fort Benning. There's a library you can like do some volunteer stuff for. So we'd always kind of seen each other and volunteered at different places together. So we had a thread of the military, a thread of service, and kind of the thread of just caring about soldiers. And so all that came together once we got out. I was in MBA, I was in NYU. Tim I think he was still in service at that time, or he was getting ready to get out. And we thought about like, what can we do to continue to kind of serve others in this capacity and still kind of maintain the military connection. And so that was the idea for service school. Was we had a lot of soldiers, and I'll say soldiers because I was in the Army, but we had a lot of soldiers who very, very smart, very, very capable, but maybe didn't have the same opportunities others, may hadn't heard of different kinds of schools and different things that they could achieve. And we're like, well, let's figure out a way to try to reach as many of those people as we can to then help them into school. And so that was kind of maybe the last thread. So we talked about service, talked about soldiers, talked about the military. The third is, it might be this kind of thread of education and kind of immigrant influence. So my family came from Nicaragua, and they'd always kind of valued education real highly. Tim's family is from like Taiwan, China. And so they also were kind of first, second generation, highly valued education. KT's family, I think, is from Lebanon. So almost all the founders have an immigrant or either first or second generation Americans. Sure. And all of them have a very strong kind of, if you know any like first or second generations, all they talk every time, it's just education and hard work is it. Yep. And so that was the other thread that kind of inspired us to kind of start this organization.
Love it. The best long answer there, Gus, because I just picture you guys, kind of like going through the trenches together and then still wanting to help other people. And I think that's so much of when I'm talking to our ambassadors, and just thanking them for their time, because there's a million other things, you all could have been devoting your time to, and our ambassadors could be devoting their time to. and just wanting to help this community, I think is just a really cool mission. And then how did you get linked up with Anna?
That happened pretty soon after. That's why it was kind of an idea of Tim and I, but we quickly realized that we didn't have the full capability we needed. And so I think Tim knew Khalil and Khalil knew Anna.
Okay.
And so Khalil was another just super rock star. And I think he was in the service at the time when we were starting it, but he was, very dedicated to education, was looking for a kind of a cause to help develop and build. And then he knew Anna, because Anna is really like the core of our education and admissions knowledge, because none of us knew anything, but we all went to West Point. So nobody really knew about how to apply or get into other schools. And so Anna was like and Anna had some military connections as well. I think her father was taught soldiers in Germany or something like that. So she cared about the military, but then she was just such an expert in admissions and higher ed. And so that was kind of she is like the expert in this. So then we all came together and kind of formulated Service to School from there.
In speaking with Anna, it was just really interesting hearing kind of the higher ed education admissions piece. And then now speaking with you and hearing, kind of you all bringing that service piece together and just kind of like meshing both of your worlds. Because like you said, applying to service academies is so different. I've been, helping students apply to college for the last 10 years, and the service academy route has so many more checkpoints and, the physical fitness piece and just different things that those admissions committees are looking for. And then when you talk to a student who's applying to a state school or a private school, all women's college, those are very different admissions processes. And just kind of like the why do you want to go to a service academy versus, why would you go to an all women's college? I think there's certainly some overlap, but I love that you all saw that gap and you're like, yes, need to get an expert for that. To fill
there's so many blind spots, that we have. There's my firm does a training called Blind Spots. That's about diversity and inclusion. That's super helpful. But you can think, even though, KT has a Middle East background, I have a Central American background, Tim has a Taiwanese background, we're all kind of West Point people, And so one of the things like that was another blind spot was a lot of soldiers have terrible experiences with West Point officers. I was like, oh, we're the best, but maybe we're not. And I remember I went to a Columbia event when I had just gotten out. I think I was, this was 2009 or 2010. I was talking to a group of Columbia undergrads that were soldiers. And I kind of started with, hey, I went to West Point, I'm an infantry officer, Gus, blah, blah, blah. And everybody was turned off by that. Like no one, they didn't want to hear from an officer. They didn't want to hear from a West Point person. They didn't want to hear, all the stuff. And I was like, I'm trying to help you with your career and think through things. And they're like, nah,
Yeah.
So that's one of the other like big learnings is like, there's some people that, you have to have a diversity of folks so that you can reach everybody you want to reach. And especially with enlisted soldiers, like a specialist, like we one time had one ranger, he was a specialist from Ranger Battalion, go through the program, and he had just randomly saw us on a website or something. The next cycle, we had like 30 people from battalion. And basically, if you're a specialist, you're going to listen to one specialist over a senior enlisted member, an officer. And that was like a light bulb moment for us too, about kind of blind spots and the importance of having the right level of diversity, having the right kind of folks to help you reach all the people you want to reach.
Yeah. And I think we even still see that today, right? When I'm talking to applicants on calls and, we're going kind of through their background, some of them will say, yeah, I would really like to talk to someone who is in my same MOS. Because I think that peer-to-peer piece is just so important to them, as far as even just like translating their experiences, or someone that they feel comfortable and can be vulnerable, because college admissions process just requires vulnerability, right? You're laying it all out there for strangers and admissions committee to read. So having someone on your team that understands, the transition that you're making and kind of, that work that you put in, is just, I think the reward there is huge. Right. But still being involved as, co-chairman of the board, looking at where the organization has come since 2011, what would you say has been the biggest evolution of Service to School?
The biggest evolution. There's so many like little evolutions, that's maybe part of it is that, it's just been kind of step by step by step by step. We never really had there's maybe a couple kind of step changes. I'll cover those, but it's basically taken day in, day out work for 10 years to be able to reach, the few thousand that we reach. It's just, I think that's important. That there's no real magic bullet. The biggest is we had a huge generous donation from a veteran who likes to remain anonymous, but is a hedge fund titan, maybe you would say. And he gave us enough money that we could hire our first FTE. And so we hired our first CEO on his super generous donation. And that was probably the biggest milestone moment. Now, right around there, we also got that helped us get a number of big foundation grants from a number of the foundations that support us. Mann Foundation, the Schultz Foundation, Paul Newman's Foundation. It also helped us start the VetLink program, which provides a lot of our income, the partnerships that we have with a number of top schools. So that first big donation that let us hire someone is probably the biggest part of the evolution. But it's been, reaching out to, it's a lot of college fairs, it's a lot of one-on-one talks with students. It's those students spreading it by word of mouth, or veterans or service members spreading it by word of mouth. I think that was probably the biggest. And then each kind of leader of service to school brings something. We've had a number of executive directors like Joe Lynch or Rahul Harpalani, Andrea Goldstein, Christine was our COO and is now our CEO. Like each one of those brings kind of another level of quality and capability to service to schools. So it's really just these combined effort of so many people coming together to kind of move it forward.
And that word of mouth piece, it's always fun when I'm talking to someone, I'm like, so how'd you hear about service to school? And they say something, I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay, now I go and research. Like, I think there's another podcast, Rangers in the title. I can't remember what it's called, but another military, focused podcast. And someone said they heard us on that podcast. So then I was like trying to Google that episode and figure out like what they were talking about to tie us in, or, they saw us mentioned in Military Times article. And it's just piecing those together to, just kind of spread that word has been interesting to see where service to school kind of falls in conversations. But even someone the other day said they saw a service to school poster
Really?
in their battalion, like hanging up in their battalion office. And I was like, I didn't even know we had posters.
Yeah. And that was when we first started. We were like, okay, well, we're going to get on bases and that's going to solve everything. Or we're going to get in the transition program, TAPS, whatever they call it now, and that's going to solve everything. And then kind of what I've realized is that, like, look, there's not going to be a single magic bullet. There's going to be like 15 things that we have to do well every day for us to be able to grow. And really the point isn't grow to growth's sake. The point is that I want to make sure every soldier that wants to go to a great school, whether it be Harvard or UNC or UT Austin, can do that and can at least know what they're capable of, get a good assessment of where they should be, and then get some assistance to be able to translate their experiences into something that an admissions office is going to recognize and that will resonate with them.
I think that part is so important too, is being able to translate that experience to something that someone who has no idea what their life in the military entails. I tell them, we move every 2 years as an active duty Army family, and people are like, what? That's crazy. I had no idea you moved that much. And just, a simple PCS and how that disrupts education, normal life stuff. I think there's just, an admissions committee has no idea.
Yeah.
So the VetLink addendum that, is there to serve as that demilitarized resume is just huge. I wish I had something like that when I was reading applications for GW, because it's just incredible context that you would never have otherwise. Every college should be using the VetLink addendum, personally, is 100%. My opinion.
Yeah, and there's so many layers that are important to the admissions process. I mean, I remember when we first started this, people were asking, a sergeant E5 who'd done 3 tours in Iraq and was 24 years old, 25 years old, for their high school guidance counselor recommendation. It's like, I would, if I was in that person's position, I got to ask for my high school guidance counselor's recommendation. That would turn me off so much, I might not apply.
Absolutely. Wouldn't even know who to reach out to get that.
Yeah. It just shows such a lack of understanding, which luckily I think that's part of the VetLink program, is that, two-way education process. Another one that I think about is, military awards, right? They don't necessarily just hand them out, but for an officer to get a Bronze Star for a deployment is leagues easier than it is for an E5 to get a Bronze Star. So if you have an E5 or an E4 that got a Bronze Star, that's really, really, really special. And that should be explained and kind of translated versus, I'm proud of my Bronze Star, but I know what I had to do it. And I know that it was easier for me than it would be for a lower enlisted soldier.
And again, just context that admissions wouldn't have otherwise. So. Yeah. Kind of going off of that same idea, what would you say you think is the biggest hurdle that veterans face in higher education today?
Probably themselves first. It's we had one soldier who was from South Central LA, didn't do great in high school. He had other things that were going on in his life that prevented him from kind of, giving his full at high school. But he joined the military, joined the Army right after, and got disciplined, kind of got built some self-worth, and then got out, went to community college, did really well in community college. And he's like, oh, you know what, maybe I'm smarter than they told me I was in high school. I'm actually doing really good. So maybe I could go to college, right? And of course, like a lot of vets who just don't have the educational background or the knowledge, he applied to the schools that vets know, which are all for-profit schools. And so, he was accepted to DeVry. And right before, but luckily he got some counseling in between getting accepted and signing. But literally the day before he was going to sign with DeVry, he got into Stanford University. So it's I mean, Can you imagine that in your life going to a for-profit school versus Stanford University?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing is just, not everyone can get into Stanford, Harvard. Not everyone can get into UT or UNC. And you might not want to. One of the things I found is a lot of my soldiers a lot of people have found their own way. I've soldiers that do underwater, the scuba diving, the welding, underwater welding. That requires some schooling, but it doesn't require a 4-year degree. I have soldiers that are doing kind of technical trade type work. I have soldiers that are, just started working right after the military. They either got a government job or they were able to get a kind of a white collar job in an office or something without a degree. And then I got soldiers that, went into these kind of top 4, top 10 schools or top 20 or top 30. So it's not necessarily you have to go one way or another, but that person's life going to DeVry versus Stanford is leagues different. And that's kind of why we want to solve for undermatching,
Sure. Yep, absolutely. And those are the most fun conversations that I get to have here talking to our applicants. Was talking to one the other day, and he's been doing like mechanical work, and now is thinking, okay, maybe I'll go and do electrical engineering. And he was like, but I don't have a lot of the, classes that they're looking for. And I was like, look, go take these prereqs at a community college. But what's going to make you stand out the most isn't those community college classes. It's that you get to tell a story through your essays about how your time in service has prepared you, to be successful in this career. You can say you've been doing this work. And when, like giving him that confidence and just hearing from someone that, no, man, like your work in the military is not for nothing. Like you have a lot to be proud of and to be able to share with an admissions committee. And those are just truly some of the most rewarding conversations that we're able to have here. So
yeah, well, I think you hit on probably the second biggest one, which is having a thoughtful plan. Almost every vet has some level of go to community college first. And community colleges are really the one of America's best kept secrets, because you can go for a couple of years, you can tighten up your schooling, you can get back into the academic rhythm, and then you can transfer to an amazing school. So community colleges are really, but you have to plan for that. So you have to plan, okay, I'm getting out, Sergeant Snuffy is getting out, like, okay, what do I want to do career-wise? Do I need college for that? Okay, well then let me plan a couple years community college. How am I going to live? How am I going to support the family? How am I going to, and then plan for the 2-year college degree. So thinking through that plan and figuring out how you're going to make it work is probably the second biggest, besides believing in yourself.
Yeah, and that plan. So using your benefits, right? So we talked a little bit before this about tuition assistance, but another one, if an institution is investing in a student veteran and providing institutional financial aid, and they can save that, say their plan is to go to an MBA or to law school or even med school, and you can save your benefits for graduate school, right? Like if that is part of your plan, that end goal, that costs a lot of money. So to put in your plan to be able to set yourself up financially as well. Certainly everyone isn't in the position to do that, but gosh, if you have the foresight to plan, and can save those benefits, that's huge. But another thing that we came across recently is the NCO that my husband works with, her spouse is using his benefits to go to trade school, to work on HVAC. The trade school that he's attending is a for-profit and just recently shut down. And now he's left having already used those benefits, but community colleges offer those courses, right?
Yeah.
So like going back to your point that a community college is like sometimes the best kept secret. I mean, to be able to go to a community college and get that same education, that same trade work, and institution that you're using your benefits wisely, is just so big.
And my stance on for-profits is kind of softened a little bit over the years, because I kind of see now the need for having something where you can get like a virtual education, so I saw when we first started. I mean, I think Tim and I wrote a New York Times op-ed on just how awful the for-profits were and how they were targeting veterans, and I think that's largely true. But there are, like, and the one you mentioned is a great example of that. Corinthian College was another example of that. And for-profits are still like the top 10 recipients of GI Bill funding, which is largely atrocious. But what it's important is for you as the service member transitioning to just do some research and say, okay, is this degree going to get me where I want to get to, or am I just doing it because I've heard get a degree and you'll be set? Because that's not the case. You can get a very expensive degree and then not get a great job and then just have a lot of debt. So it's important, like you said, if trade school's the route you want to go, make sure if you're going to a for-profit for that, I think community college, like you said, much better option. But if you're going to a for-profit for that, just make sure it's very reputable and you know people and you've talked to people that have done that route and they're successful, and that you kind of do some of that homework. And service to school can certainly help you do that, but it's important, I think, for you as a vet to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just requires some forethought, though, like you said, not just going the easy route, which, I mean, we all prefer the easy route. That's why I have those couch to 5K training things, right? You can't just go the easy route to run a marathon. And then, so coming back to, you founding Service to School, where do you see Service to School going?
So, I mean, we serve about 2,000 to 3,000 vets a year, depending on how you want to, what exactly is serving, because we don't matriculate that many, but we do help out a lot of folks in terms of our one-on-one mentorship, in terms of downloads of a lot of our guidebooks. So what is the upper end of our services? Let's assume you get 100,000 vets leaving every year. Let's assume half those want to go to college and half those are going to find their own way. Then assume of that half, maybe 20-30% really need help and don't understand. That's 20 to 30,000. That's 10 to 20,000. So at least 10,000, at least 20,000 more. I think VetLink should probably be in nearly every top 50, top 100 school in the country. So I think really the goal here is to solve for undermatching. And it's hard to say how many veterans are being undermatched, but how many veterans, if for-profits are the top 10 recipients of GI Bill money, then that's, hundreds of thousands of veterans that are probably not achieving what they could achieve because they're getting robbed by a lot of slick marketing and lack of knowledge.
Oh yeah, it's that slick marketing, man. You watch TV, you listen to, the radio, you drive past most installations. It's that marketing that, it's the name.
In Fort Bragg, right? I grew up in Spring Lake, North Carolina. So go outside any military base. You see quick loans, you see fast cash, you see pawn shops, you see, half my privates we got back, they buy F-150s for, at the time, I don't know, 25,000, they're probably 50,000 now. Everybody has a new motorcycle. Like, at the time it was all male, and it was all infantry. And so everyone's just blowing their money on just the dumbest stuff. So service to school can't necessarily solve for that. The military members are sometimes easy marks, but we can at least try to help people make better education choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just the access to education choices too, right? The access to information. You don't know what you don't know. Like when I talk to applicants and they're like, I don't really know what questions to ask. And I'm like, that's fine. You don't, that's what you're here for. You're here to, if that question comes up, to ask your ambassador or reach out to your service to school advisor. And I think just having someone that they trust, that they know will give them, better information, even that's meeting a need.
Yeah.
So
it reminds me of, I had this soldier named Goats. This is terrible, but one is, when we got to Germany, everyone was taking bets on who was going to be the first person to marry a German woman just off the bat. It took about 3 weeks, and Goats got married a German woman right off the bat. Just to give you, he makes decisions fast and not necessarily most rationally. But there was the other thing Goats did is, so we were doing, the NCOs were doing a room inspection, but I was just going with them, just kind of be part of the process. I'm going there, and Goats has a brand new Encyclopedia Britannica set, like, in the barracks. He's got this cabinet or drawers.
Lots of books.
Just all these glossy books. And I'm like, I'll try to not use the language, but Goats, what is this? What are you doing? And he's like, well, I talked to this guy his name was like Jimmy John's. Literally, he had a name. I was like Jason Johns. Literally,
and now he's had a successful sandwich shop.
He does, hopefully. But so he was like, no, well, there's this old NCO Jimmy Johns. He sits outside the chow hall. He's a civilian now, and he was saying, well, hey, do you want to go to college? And Goats is like, Goats is coming out of the chow hall. Do you want to go to college? Yeah, I want to go to college. Well, you're going to need books, aren't you? Yeah, I think I'm going to need books. Sold him $2,000 Encyclopedia Britannica. So me and the NCOs literally went right there, right to the chow hall. There's this guy, Jimmy Johns, who sits outside the chow hall, and we're like, get off base right now, or there's going to be some issues. We never want to see you here again. And he just takes off running. But now, so that's like the information. Like we have Goats level information, which is, I want to go to school. I need some books. I'm going to buy this $2,000 set of Encyclopedia Britannica. And it's like, Goats, try to get rid of those books. Like, try to sell those or something.
Yeah.
Don't, but that's kind of I'll say Goats is the inspiration then for service to school.
There you go. Well, thanks, Goats, because I now have the best job to be able to support veterans throughout this process. So I guess I need to write Goats a thank you letter.
Yeah, me too. I need to go look up Goats and see what he's doing.
Yeah. I mean, we'd love to have him on the podcast. He's a lot of really
great encyclopedias now.
Goats, great stories. Gus, just last question for you. What would you say is your biggest piece of advice to service members who are considering going on and pursuing higher education?
There's the longer I've been out of the military and the older I get, the less I want to give advice to anybody, because there's just so many different paths out there for people to take. I don't know if you want to take advice from me or not. So just take it with a grain of salt, this advice. Now, I think that probably the best thing is just to do some thinking about what you really truly enjoy and what you want to do, and being honest with yourself about it, because it's very easy for us to convince ourselves we like one thing or like another because of kind of the story we tell ourselves, and we don't necessarily have that much honesty. And especially when you're getting out of the military, it's such a big change. Even now, I mean, I got out in 2009, so I've been out of the military longer than I was ever in the military. And I still feel like a soldier. Like, that's still kind of core to my identity. I don't talk about it. I'm pretty close to wearing the hat, like Iraq war veteran. I'm pretty close. Yeah. I'm pretty close to wearing the hat. I'm not wearing the hat yet, but I think give me another 5 years, I'm probably gonna be wearing the hat. But it's still pretty core to my identity. And I think so that's such a big change. You really got to think about what do you want to do and why? And it's such a fast change sometimes. It's like you really got to think through it. And so I guess the way to summarize that would be, really be true to yourself and really think hard about what you want your life to be about post-service. And hopefully that, service to school can help you achieve that if it involves education.
Great advice. That why, I think it can be overwhelming and daunting to say, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Especially when that has been your identity. But that's, again, that peer-to-peer piece and just talking to people and hearing how other people, came to that conclusion or what they talked through and worked through, I think is incredibly valuable. So I hope our listeners, if you're not working with service to school, take Gus's advice, start to think about that why and what that next step is going to look like as you begin to transition. But Gus, thank you so much for your time. I know we're on a hard stop here, but it's been so much fun. I hope we get to have more of these conversations down the road. But the value that you have provided to Service to School as an organization and that you continue to provide is incredibly meaningful. So thank you for the impact you're having on, this community and the work that you and Tim and all the other founders and Anna put in place for Service to School to be where we're at today. So thanks again.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, the Director of Student Success, and produced by Amanda Tobias, the Director of Communication at Service to School. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next time and follow us for more on all of your favorite social media platforms.